Hello and welcome to this episode of Concise Conversations. Today we're going to be speaking to Sven-Anwar Bibi. Sven is head of culture and strategy at Futurice, which is a company that helps other organisations build resilience and take control of their own futures. We talked to Sven about how he helps his clients move from an analogue to a digital world, and we also speak to him about an interesting time in his life during the Arab Springs. And finally, we get to know Sven just a little bit better with the Concise Conversations First 8 Questions. Enjoy. Hi Sven, thanks for joining us on today's episode of Concise Conversations.
Hey Bob, I'm super happy to be here. Thank you for inviting me.
So you're currently the Principal of Strategy and Culture at Futurice. I'd like to talk a little bit about what that is and what that role entails, but before we go into that, could you tell us a bit of a background story of how you got there and what got you interested in that type of stuff?
For sure I can. I mean, most probably it's a bit more than a sentence.
Tell us the whole story.
What's that journey, let's say?
Yes.
I guess in general it started off by late 2013 when I came back after a longer period abroad, where I've been teaching at the German University in Cairo, and heading the Faculty of Design as the Dean and Head of Product Design. And I had to decide actually whether I would like to go back into building up my own office again, sticking around with product development, industrial design, or whether I would like to actually join a bit more of the digital world and digital scope of design.
Sure.
So I ended up working for an innovation and strategy culture strategy agency in Berlin and Munich that were specialized on supporting large corporates and building products and services around digital products. And eventually I started conversations with Futurice around the question of how do organizations actually have to be built these days in order to make sure that they can create resilience towards changes and towards the transformations that are going alongside with digitization. And so I ended up actually working for them in May 2020 and smoothly entered a tough time, during the first lockdown, and moved into strategy and culture by the beginning of 2021. Before that, I was working with the designers within the organization, which was pretty much similar to the activities that I'm doing right now.
It's always interesting to me about this, the current time we're in, which we've moved further on, and it used to be that like the digital world and then the real world were apart, and we all knew that they were coming together, and people weren't really sure how to manage it, but now it's almost like essential that they're fully integrated, otherwise you're not going to survive very much longer. Is that something that you would agree with?
Absolutely. I mean, if we look at the imprint of digital technologies or technologies in general on our daily life, on our everyday daily life stuff, we can see it. And first thing in the morning, most probably all of us do check whatever kind of app on their mobile phone. May it be the news, or may it be the weather, or may it be the smart home. How is the house doing? Are the kids still awake? Or again, how is the dog doing, or the cat? Is everything still secure? Did my mother have any incident overnight? Or whatsoever. I mean, you name it. Yes, there's obviously there's the divide between the analog or the physical world and the digital world no longer is existing. It's a total blend. And sometimes it's very difficult to distinguish which one of both sides, let's say, is stronger than the other.
So it'd be good if you could kind of give us some examples of sort of like situations where you've been approached to act with for another company to like help them with their cultural shift from the physical world into the digital world.
I guess that's even if we're not specifically approached to support transformations, not that much of cultural means, because usually what you find, usually there's a culture everywhere. If someone talks about cultural transformation, you will find a culture in the first place that you can support in transforming into nothing different, but maybe to bring it to a new interpretation or level of understanding. But in basically all the different projects that we are dealing with as Futurice, we are looking at the massive impacts that new technologies, new business models, and the new ways of working actually have on the social structures of organizations.
Yeah.
So within that strong entanglement between, let's say, a strongly software, data, AI driven business, you will have to deal with the question of what does this mean to your organization, and this is where cultural understanding and the way how you interpret culture in a new way very often needs to be supported by external consultants.
Right. And when they come and approach you, so that they basically don't say, "Oh, please come and help me sort out my culture," they come and say, "Oh, we've got one specific issue that we need advice with," and while you're giving them that advice, you then have to think, well, the only way that we can really implement this is also by looking at the existing culture and then, shifting that culture so that these strategies are in place.
Well, I think it's you will find both.
Yeah.
You will find, let's say, the very shallow request to support in a situation where organizations are facing challenges of, for example, a mismatch between the digital products that they provide and the way that they understand leadership, which sometimes might still be somehow stuck in the past. So this is usually something where organizations very often come and they trigger requests that say, can you support us in understanding the means of digital leadership in a better way? What does it actually mean? What kind of digital literacy do we have to build? What kind of capabilities and skills does our leadership actually have to develop, and how can we empower young leaders to actually cope with the situation that the type of business, the characteristic of the business has been transforming pretty strongly. So this is a very concrete request and approach that we are dealing with basically on a daily basis. But what you very often also face, or what we also see, is that we are engaged in a data project, we engage in a digital product or software development project. And just by working very closely with organizations in a strongly co-creative way, we do get insights into their daily operations. And by having that, we very often detect and observe that there are possibilities to optimize their internal processes, for example, and to streamline their ways of working. And just by the fact that we are in there already, and yet that usually we build a strong partnership and a very collaborative way of co-creation and cooperation, we get the chance to consult them in those directions as well.
So, and you've worked quite a bit with in the medical sphere, so I would imagine that is quite a difficult one, because people have spent so much of their time and their lives learning how to be experts in one particular field, and then now suddenly they're being asked to learn all these other things to incorporate into that. How has that been for you?
Well, if you talk about the perspective on customer side or on organizational side, yes, it's exactly like that. If you talk about the perspective of the HCPs or the practitioners that usually also have this very, let's say, narrow perspective on one particular or specific field within healthcare, yes, that's obviously a challenge. I mean, if you go back 100 years, and we all know that from stories, most probably every family had their family doctor.
Yeah.
Right. So this one family doctor had the overview of 2 or 3 or 4 generations of people from the same family.
Yeah.
And usually he was the hub.
Yeah.
So he was the health hub, the very analog and human health hub that was capable of detecting the in-betweens and the implicit, let's say, diagnosis of family health. This does no longer exist.
No.
Right, we have a very distributed and fragmentized landscape.
Although they try and pretend it still exists. I mean, I still have a doctor, but I'm not really sure what that means anymore. I mean,
well, he most probably doesn't know much about you.
Yeah.
He might know you from those very moments where you come and see him.
Yeah.
But he doesn't know very much left and right.
No, exactly.
You know.
No, exactly.
So that's one of the big challenges, obviously, in healthcare. That we need to build systems that allow a consistent and continuous patient journey to be understood by all different stakeholders that at one point enter this journey and then leave again. But they leave traces, they leave data, they leave their specific mark and imprint on the patient, let's say, constitution, health or not health, which very often is not seen by others.
Yes.
And that makes it so difficult. Yes. Plus, what is changing is that patients more and more become the owners of their journeys.
Right, yeah.
So no longer the doctor is the one that sends you from A to B. Very often the patient is the one that demands to be sent from A to C.
Right. Oh, right. Yeah.
And this is due to the fact that health literacy has been developing quite fast due to the internet, where Dr. Google is all around, and very often patients visit a doctor and they know a lot about their current situation.
Yeah, that's interesting as well, because it feels like you're designing little bits of a matrix, but you know that other bits of the matrix have not yet been thought about or built, but you still want it to be built in a way that when they come round, that they will be able to interact with each other. Is that that feels like exciting, but also strange and difficult to deal with it? Have I understood that right?
Yeah, it is in a way. It is exciting in a way, because what we try to do is to look at a specific problem in a very holistic way, and to understand the interdependencies between the different dots on not even a line, but somewhere in that cloud there, on that landscape, and then connect the right ones, or at least allow to connect the right ones according to the specific individual need.
Or even leave some tendrils hanging that can be connected to in the future, sort of thing.
Even that, because if we think about it in a very ecosystemic way, there might be certain services and products, for example, that are not yet technologically developed to the extent that they could be implemented into an ecosystem thinking. So there will be certain, let's say, branches that have disconnects, but they will be filled at one point.
At least we hope so, because we know how long these things can be.
Well, we do. I mean,
can be left hanging.
I'm pretty sure, and all the big companies that we are working with, they are engaging into research to really understand exactly those gaps.
Yeah.
Because once you understand those gaps, you can build quite solid and patient-centric business models around it. That increase the value of your own business.
Yeah. It's an interesting thing to think about, that shift of the consumer or the patient managing their own journey, because it feels really like an empowering thing. And do you think that will have significant health impacts for society as a whole moving forward, or do you think there might be some difficulties or risks around it?
Well, if we would ever get there, it would have obviously, yes, a very significant impact on health systems in general. But still here, we also have to take care that we mitigate the risk of becoming too Eurocentric when looking at these things, right? I mean, this is a very Central European perspective on health, or even if you go to the Nordics, it becomes even more digitally supported. But if you look at many parts or at the majority of population in the rest of the world, they are far away from having even the slightest access to health systems, even the slightest access to medical support. So we have to be aware that also this discussion needs to be led at one point. How much of that, let's say, that transformational value that we create within our systems has to at one point be distributed across the world to those who don't have access, who don't have the possibility to decide by themselves, who don't have the knowledge to understand that certain, let's say, diseases are not God-given, but there's a specific reason why they occur.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, just looking at polio, if you look at polio, and if you look at what the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation is doing together with the Rotary Club International, they are trying to actually get rid of polio worldwide.
Yeah.
And to a certain extent, they reached that goal. Now, due to crisis situations in the world, we can see an increase of polio in some countries again.
Yeah.
And that very often has a lot to do with the fact that certain groups of people are using certain religiously imprinted stories, for example, to manipulate the health environments in their countries, so people don't get vaccines against polio.
Yeah, so that's that other side of the coin that we're experiencing, isn't it? It's all this interconnectedness has allowed us to build these products and services and share information rapidly and efficiently, but unfortunately it's also allowed us to do exactly the same with disinformation. So there's that sort of like difficult, like, if the technology's there, can you trust the information that the technology is delivering to you, and like who manages and controls that? So that's an interesting perspective. Do you think that there is going to be a problem with trust going forward in some parts of the world, or do you think that will solve itself quite easily?
If we look at the health, into the health environment, yes, of course, trust, data security, data privacy, cyber security. I mean, those are the drivers of a lot of technological developments that we will see in the future. If we manage to actually allow each and every single stakeholder within those systems to understand that there is security, to understand that there is privacy, to understand that there is trust in the systems that are used and the technologies that are used, I think then we will see a strong acceleration and increase of the different services and products that will be offered. But as we know that this is pretty much depending on regulatory situations that are so different depending on which regions of the world we're looking at, or which regions even in Europe we're looking at, it will become quite difficult to create some kind of a consistent way of handling even within Europe, which is super difficult.
And it feels, especially like obviously coming from the UK, we have the centralized NHS system, which doesn't fit as easily into probably the more private medical systems that exist throughout the world. So those challenges feel like they're going to be becoming thick and fast as and they block the services from developing as quickly as they could. Do you and your company interface much with regulators in terms of trying to help them come up with new regulations and things like that, or is it not something that's in your sphere?
No, I think it's the other way around. We try to understand what's happening on the regulatory side to be ready for it in terms of consulting jobs that we do for medical companies. So we do have consultants that are specialized on certain certifications and certain audits, the documentation side of regulations and everything that is so needed if you, for example, go into building software as a medical device or medical device regulatory topics that are so crucial. It's quite, let's say, challenging, not because of the fact that it's so complex and difficult, but just due to the fact that you need to maintain and obey a very specific process that is so linear, let's say, and very often is exactly the opposite to what we do if we work agile, right? So it's impossible, basically, to actually have both of these frameworks meet. It's quite difficult.
Is there are there any examples you could give us of a product that you've like rapidly prototyped and brought to market and taken from just being sort of a physical product and then enhanced it with like digitally, the digital infrastructure behind it?
Well, obviously I cannot talk about it in detail due to confidentiality reasons. But if you look into the medtech environment of physical devices that are somehow capable of diagnosing whatever, where in the past it might have been enough that the technology used is so well designed and engineered that it comes up with a very proper and accurate and super exact result. Today, you have to also make sure that the device itself is somehow embedded into a digital infrastructure due to the fact that, for example, software updates need to be automated. Due to the fact, for example, that certain data from the devices can be used for predictive maintenance reasons or other service topics that might show up. Due to the fact that you can actually optimize workflows on the machines just due to the fact that you gain knowledge along the way of how they are used and operated. So this is there are a couple of examples of this kind, but I hope you understand that I cannot talk in detail about them.
Damn, I thought we were going to get an exclusive, but fair enough. Don't want to break any confidentiality agreements just to get a few extra views. So I'd like to talk, move a little bit away from the strategy and culture and talk about like an interesting part of your life story, which is when you were based in Egypt and then that you were there during a big historical event. Would it be okay to talk about that for a bit?
Of course, anytime.
So
where do you want to start?
Where is the best place to start for this story?
How did I get there?
First things first, how did you get there?
I mean, why should you end up in Egypt working for the German University in Cairo? I was requested for a research project by the end of 2009, so which is what 13 years ago almost.
2009 should be like 2 years ago, shouldn't it? But it's 13 years ago.
It's not, yes. I was supposed to work on a research project on building up or rebuilding the old craft infrastructures in the ancient Cairo in areas where the craftsmen were sitting. So it was
pyramid building,
woodwork, pyramid building, obviously, woodwork, clay, textile, and glass. I mean, those are the four huge craft areas that where Egypt grew with, and they used to have a strong culture and a very high standard of crafts. And at one point it disappeared, like in so many countries of the world. At one point craft somehow decreases and it almost vanishes. The Aga Khan Foundation wanted to actually drive this forward as a foundation that supports the re-establishment of cultures in especially the Arab world.
Did that come into existence at that time, or had it existed for some time? I've not heard of that organisation.
Well, Aga Khan Foundation is a very old foundation that has been there for decades and decades and decades, and it still exists. But at some point, the funding didn't happen. And part of that consortium that was supposed to fund was Aga Khan Foundation. A German university in Cairo was in there as an academic institution who was supposed to support the research part of it. And I forgot who else. Anyway, it didn't happen.
Right.
Just didn't happen.
Right.
And then the German university approached me due to the fact that I was teaching in Italy for 4 years.
Yeah.
And they asked me if I could imagine, instead of doing the research project, work for them as a professor in product design. So I said, yeah, why not? Let's see. So I talked to the family, and we decided that it might be a good point in time due to the fact that the kids were still very young. And so we decided to actually take on this adventure.
Excellent.
And eventually left in September 2010 to Cairo.
Yeah. And then we all know that there was a big cultural shift in Egypt during that time, the Arab Springs. How did you experience that? What was it like for you to be part of that? And did you know what was happening? Or did you only understand it retrospectively?
Well, no one expected it, I would say. Especially if you are as a foreigner, an expat in a country, and we were very fresh. I mean, we just been there for 3 months. Yeah. There's so much cultural noise around you that even if there was something cooking, we wouldn't have. Yeah. We wouldn't have noticed. For us, Egypt at the end of 2010 was a beautiful place to be due to the friendliness and openness of the people. Yeah. And we really had beautiful encounters with individuals all over the place and across the country. So in January 2011, just a couple of days, on the 21st of January actually, we had to leave the country due to the fact that my wife was pregnant, and this was the last flight that we could get. And we ended up being in Germany when actually everything happened over there. So
was it already bubbling up before you left, or no?
No, not at all.
Wow.
I mean, not at all. Yeah. Not at all. Not at all. In the aftermath of the revolution, there were situations when you could feel that there's tension in the air, and something was cooking there. But what happened then was rather, let's say, terrifying, because due to the fact that the Mubarak back then actually shut down the mobile phone networks.
Wow, yeah.
None of the German expats that were not listed were any longer reachable through their mobile phones. But due to the fact that we arrived in September just before the revolution, and all of us expats didn't have a mobile phone immediately.
Right.
We actually shared the numbers of our landline phones amongst each other. So I had this list of numbers, and I was talking to the foreign ministry in Berlin on a daily basis, getting information from there, and then shipping the information through the landline numbers to my colleagues in Egypt. And it was going back and forth for 2 days until they got evacuated.
That's on the one hand, it's almost like if you'd have arrived 2 years later, maybe you would never have got that list because technology would have moved on, or it would have been easier to get a mobile phone, and and then to be at the center of it and just being able to have that impact where you're helping people actually escape from a dangerous situation. It must have been like intense.
Yeah, super intense. Especially super intense because, we were lucky because we left the country 4 days before when no one knew. But there was others over there. And I had a direct colleague. She was, during that time, she was on a PhD seminar in Germany. And her 3 kids, she left her 3 kids with the neighbors in Cairo because she figured that I will be back in a week, so shouldn't be a problem. But then the revolution happened, and she wasn't back in a week. No. That was a very frightening situation for her, definitely.
So what were the logistics of it? So how did they actually get out? Were they sort of like trying to keep quiet? Were they picked up? Were they told to rendezvous at a certain place? Can you tell me? Are you still?
Yeah, I
still
can.
A spy?
No. But talking about revolutions, very often we tend to not understand that we're not talking about a general problem across the entire country, right? So we talk about a politically very destabilized situations with particular places within, let's say, Cairo or that urban environment where things happen. But there's other areas within the city where nothing major happens. But the fact that you don't know what will happen, and the fact that you are not entangled into the social structures of the country, that leaves you totally unknown. You don't know what will happen next minute. You don't know if the road that you're driving will be blocked a kilometer in front of you. So what happened was that they collected all the Germans, and they organized convoys, basically, of buses, and brought them to the airport. And then obviously, yes, there was all the chaos and all the disaster of too many people and too little flights out of Cairo at that time. But they managed to get everyone out. No one was hurt, no one was injured, all worked fine. And I returned to Cairo in April, beginning of April, so a bit more than a month and a half after the revolution was over, basically. And that was a very specific and particular experience, obviously.
I mean, it's hard to understand why did you decide to go back? Why did you think, you know what, in spite of it all, I'm still going to continue with that path that I embarked on?
Well, after preparing your life for almost 9 months to actually depart Germany for 3 years, on a teaching contract with a German university, we wouldn't want to give up that easily. Plus, there were so many people on site that gave us thumbs up that things are getting better. So I decided to go by myself first, and only after a certain period of time then get the family to follow. And it was the right decision, because those 12 months after the revolution, they were just beautiful. Experiencing such a diverse culture as the Egyptian culture in a moment of uprise, enthusiasm, grassroots movements that you could feel everywhere, regardless of whether it's culture, academics, or even business. You could just see it everywhere. You could see it happen everywhere. That was just amazing.
And did you feel like you were able to absorb that, and did you feel like you interacted a lot with the people and started to sort of like become part of it as well?
We didn't become part of it, never.
No.
We were always observers, obviously. We are not Egyptians, and we wouldn't want to. It's a struggle that those people have to fight for themselves. But we were listeners. We had many Egyptian friends. We had many Egyptian neighbors that some of them were fighting during those weeks. And we were sitting together, and we were listening to their stories. And we were listening to all the different perspectives, obviously, because we also had friends that were more close to the military, and that meant close to Mubarak and those people within the country. So we had the entire spectrum of all the different perspectives, which put us into a position that we somehow were able to make our own idea or create our own reality of what Egypt in 2011 actually was. And then it turned actually at the end of 2011, when first problems started to occur. And we eventually decided to leave the country in 2012.
At the time. And with the students that you were teaching, were they primarily Egyptian? Or were they?
Yeah, they were 99.9% Egyptians. The German university in Cairo was founded in 2001 by Professor Dr. Ashraf Mansour as a private university with the support of the University of Ulm and University of Stuttgart and the DAAD. So it is a private Egyptian university with a strong cultural imprint of German lecturers and professors. And since end of 2012, with a Berlin-based campus, an external campus in the city of Berlin that allows Egyptian students to come to Germany for a semester or two to
Right.
spend their studies over here.
Yeah, that's a positive experience. I was fortunate enough to also get a chance to study in Germany for a few months. So that's great to be able to like offer that to like more diverse cultures and get everybody to meet each other. Because it's a great experience. For you to facilitate that over on the other side, it's really positive thing. So. So finally, just to wrap up, any other things that you want to discuss with us? Any topics that you'd like to talk about?
I mean, if you look at if I look at my, let's say, my academic and my professional journey, sometimes I have the impression that starting off as a designer and now currently working closely in strategy and supporting organizations to deal with the anxieties and the ambiguities of digital transformation that we can see basically everywhere. I have this advice to all the young designers out there that are currently still not struggling, but maybe thinking of where might I end up at. That every single step of a journey that you take most probably interconnects 5 opportunities or possibilities afterwards. And sometimes it's not about making a plan or creating a strategy of where you would like to end up once you're done, but rather also being bold enough to let go and keep with the flow. So sometimes things happen that you didn't plan and you didn't expect, right? Cairo was never planned. So many other things were never planned. Ending up at Futurice was never planned. That was a coffee on a warm afternoon in Munich where I by accident met someone that I engaged with in conversations over an entire period of a year. And eventually ended up moving to join that company. So I think stay curious throughout your entire work life and try to learn as much as possible. And I feel very privileged to still be able to learn a lot. It's not just applying the knowledge that I gained over the past 20 years, but it's still on a daily basis exploring new things that I didn't know anything of.
Oh, that's like a really cool perspective. Just learn, and then once you've got all these things that you've learned and the tools that you've built up over your career, just wait for opportunities to arise that you can use those tools to some effect. And if you try and plan too far ahead, you probably miss the opportunities that are being presented to you by life as you go along.
Not only that, because I bet that there's hundreds of opportunities that each of us missed along the way. But maybe it's also a question of humbleness, and maybe a question of how I don't know the English word for that, but how focused you want to be on really shaping your own professional life. Which might put you in a real stress situation.
What's the German word for that? Because I love it when Germans have like one word for like what you have to say in 6 sentences in English.
Can't even get that one right now. I will tell you later.
Yeah, sure. Brilliant. Are you active anywhere on social media? Do you blog or anything? Is there any way that people can, if they want to? No.
No, I don't blog. No.
Is there any way that people can follow you if they want to learn more about you going forward, or just Twitter?
I'm pretty silent. I'm pretty silent when it comes to that. You should ask my daughter; she's quite active there.
Fair enough.
But no, I'm pretty silent when it comes to that.
Well, thank you very much. This has been a really great chat. It was good to talk about like the specifics of the culture and the strategy and the innovation, and then talk to you about like that exciting time in your life. So thank you very much.
You're more than welcome.
Right, so we're going to talk to Sven now about the Concise Conversations first date questions. These are basically to get to know him a little bit better and the sort of questions that would be asked on a first date if you went out with a techie nerd. Sven, first question, what was your first computer?
Well, actually, my very first computer was.
Brilliant.
Give me a second.
Yeah.
If you can consider this being a computer, it's a
Yes, a speak and spell.
Texas Instruments Speak and Spell 1982. I received this from my uncle who was living in Texas by that time.
Yeah.
And it's obviously it's a great computer which still works.
Yeah.
That was my first, let's say, computer. But my first real computer was actually a 1996 Macintosh
Right.
4400.
I should have
Which
guessed
I loved.
that.
I still have it.
As a designer, it had to be a cool Macintosh product.
Absolutely.
Do you still have it?
That was. Yeah, I still have it.
Oh, brilliant.
Still have it. I might be missing the adapters to actually get the data from the computer. But,
Sure. But you know the data's still there and you could get it if you needed to.
It's all there.
Brilliant. What has been your favorite piece of software or app?
Well, due to the fact that I live in the mountains,
Yeah.
I love mountain sports, heavy mountain sports. I obviously, one of my most preferred and most visited apps is any weather-related apps, which are important, plus the avalanche apps that I have, which is also super important for security reasons.
That's interesting.
Yeah, those are, I guess,
as a British person, you know, it had never even entered my head that there could be such a thing as an avalanche app. But for someone like you, it's like, yeah, better just check the weather. Oh, and the avalanches. All right, better not go out today. There's going to be an avalanche. It's crazy.
Yeah, it's not about going out or not out, but whether you go skiing or not skiing. I think that's
all right. Fair enough. You're not worried that an avalanche might sweep your house away.
Very seldom that happens.
And if it did, it'd be on the app. So that's pretty cool.
True. Yeah, you would know.
This is a good answer. You sent these through before. What has been your best tech purchase of the last 12 months?
Well, I think I mentioned this earlier. I didn't purchase much tech over the past 12 months. So any tech nerd that I would have my first date with at this point would turn around and most probably leave the bar. But my analog tech that I purchased was reading glasses.
Right.
Because I got partially blind from my screen time, which increased massively over the past years.
Yeah.
2 years actually. Yeah. So that's what I purchased.
Hey, you know, if it's technology and it helps your life, it's important. Those glasses. If I was a tech nerd having a date with you, I would not walk away. But you might walk away once you put your glasses on. That might be the problem.
Might.
So yeah, you've been very well travelled. So this would be an interesting question to get your perspective on. If you had to spend 6 months abroad, somewhere that you've not spent before, where would you go? Where would entice you?
I would most probably start from here and then head towards the east.
Right.
There's many friends and family along the way. If you continue traveling towards the Middle East and further down to UAE, there's many people that I would like to see, spend time with. There's many people that I would like to meet.
Yeah.
I would like to spend time with and just talk and listen to them, because this is something that I feel is lacking due to the past 2 years of Corona and not having the chance to go to conferences and meet all these people from all over the world, where you can have these small talk exchanges on certain perspectives and the other way of seeing things. And I would most probably end up in Nepal.
Cool.
Not only for hiking, but rather for visiting a hospital that we have been funding partially over the past years. It's a spinal injury hospital in Nepal.
Yeah.
where I'm a member of Rotary, where Rotary has been intensively supporting building the hospital, training the trainers, sending medical equipment, but also financially supporting buying medical equipment on site. And specifically now during Corona, there was a strong demand of security stuff, everything that you would need to wear in order to protect yourself.
Cool, that's great.
So that's what I would do.
Yeah, brilliant. So on Concise Conversations, we have room 202. It's nothing to do with George Orwell's room 101. This is 202. Where would you put an item of technology that exists in the world today? You think the world would be better off without it?
I would put the gaming computers of my boys in that room for a certain period of time on a daily basis and lock it up. I put 2 guards in front of it, heavily armed, just to make sure that they don't sneak in and get it back. That's what I would do. I would ban digital consumption tools for larger periods of time on a daily basis, just to make sure that there is a detox possibility in the first place, which does not exist if you just talk to your kids.
Yeah, exactly. And the problem is that they're getting so good at designing the games to trigger the sort of dopamine hits in your brain that and even as adults it's hard for us to like resist it, but for kids it's a nightmare.
It's impossible.
I was speaking to my friend's son about this, and he's like 8 or 9, and he just spent like 6 hours playing Fortnite, and I was just like, you just need to know that although you played this game for a long time, there's a group of 30-year-old men in a room somewhere who are spending all their time trying to design something to rob you of your time and attention. So just make sure that you're making the right decision to play if you want to play, and know that there are people out there that are trying to manipulate you not for your own best interests. And he looked at me and told me to shut up. Okay.
Sounds familiar.
And finally, this is the most important question that we have on Concise Conversations. We feel it tells people most about a person. What is your favorite keyboard shortcut?
Well, I would say it's Apple Plus or Apple Tab, actually, just to switch programs or apps. But if I really think about it, it's not that. It's not the Apple Tab. It's most probably Apple Z.
Right.
Because any wrong decision that you took, you can reiterate and bring it back. Especially
when you're doing creative work and design work, What do you reckon is the most, and if I sometimes do some development work, what do you reckon is the most Control Zs you've pressed in a row to get back somewhere?
Well, if you
Apple Z,
if you work in a 3D, Apple Z, sorry. If you work in a 3D program, or back then, if you worked in a 3D program that didn't have a history, that drove you nuts, because at one point you understood that a decision that you took way back was causing problems now. So I think, or even writing texts, if you have to edit text, sometimes you go back. But most of the programs, they don't have problems with doing that.
Exactly. Brilliant. That was a lot of fun. Thanks for spending some time with us answering the first 8 questions.
Well, thank you, Bob. Thank you very much for asking those 8 questions.